Hello again, I'm Dave Apsley. I'm a forester and a natural resources specialist with Ohio State University Extension. Today, I'd like to introduce you to Callery pear. Many folks know this as Bradford pear, and in fact, Bradford pear is a cultivar of Callery pears. Bradford pear was widely planted in landscapes throughout North America. In the eastern part of the United States, you'll find it as specimen trees in landscapes. You'll find it as street trees in urban areas. On rural properties, you'll often find it as a boundary like it is here. Widely planted, they produce these beautiful white flowers in the spring. We're actually April 11th today, and these things are getting towards the end of that peak of the flowering, but you'll find them in various stages of flowering right now. But they were planted because of the flowers and because of the beautiful foliage. And then most of them had a nice conical shape to them. They were very uniform. So folks like to see rows, continuous rows of multiples of these trees on property boundaries. So what makes this plant so invasive is that it does flower prolifically. Bradford pear was actually sterile and it could not reproduce because it was essentially a clone. But as we've had more of these around for longer periods of time, folks found out that they had some major structural problems. They had very sharp branch angles, and it wasn't uncommon as these trees matured for branches to split out or break out of these Bradford pears. So additional cultivars of Callery pears were introduced, things like Cleveland Select and Red Spire. And additional cultivars, as they were introduced, were able to cross-pollinate with the Bradford pear and produce fertile fruit. So the flowers on the Callery pears are in clusters. Those clusters can be 2 to 4 inches wide of these little flowers. They're about a 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch in diameter with 5 petals, actually very beautiful flowers. And then once the flowers mature, the petals of course will fall off and they'll start to form a fruit. The fruit doesn't really look like a pear like we would think of normally. It's not that same shape. It's more rounded, but it has a similar surface and texture as a pear. Kind of that metallic looking fruit color with lots of little dots on it. But anyway, as those fruits mature in the fall, they're really not very tasty for wildlife. But after a frost, they are consumed by many bird species, and that's how they spread throughout the landscapes. So again, Bradford pear did not produce fruit until the other cultivars were introduced, and now that they're introduced, they can reproduce and produce those little pears that birds will consume and spread throughout the landscape. So the leaves on Bradford pear are anywhere from about 3 to 4 inches long, very glossy on the surface, and a very finely serrate or finely toothed edge or margin. One of the reasons it was highly preferred as well is the fall colors can vary quite a bit. You can have yellows to deep purples and lots of colors in between, as long as they can produce that fall color before frost. So they can get up to about 30 feet or so in height, various shapes depending on the cultivar we're dealing with. Another thing I should mention is that the branches, especially on the escapees, will have spurs. Most people think of them as thorns, but truly they are spur shoots, and that's where the fruit is produced. And the cultivars that have escaped can have very sharp and pointed spur shoots throughout the canopy. The bark is fairly smooth when it's young, with lots of dots or lenticels, and then as it ages, it gets a little bit more deeply furrowed. Rarely do you see these much more than 12 or so inches in diameter, but occasionally you'll find one up to about 18 inches in diameter, especially if it's been heavily pruned, they can get fairly large. If they're not pruned, typically a branch will break out and then they'll get cut down at that point in time. But again, this is Callery pear. It's a non-native invasive plant that will be illegal to plant in Ohio in January of 2023. And it's a problem because it is escaping into many of our natural areas, especially old reverting fields that are going back to forest. They can be completely covered with these Callery pears, and they're also along a lot of the roadsides, so they're there producing that fruit to fill any gap that might occur in the forest. Thank you so much for your time, and please take at least part of your day to enjoy it in the woods.